ध्यायेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणीश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षादात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामज्जतव पवनचलनरोधात् आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्। Namo Ramana. In this Tuesday Atma Vichara session from Ramanacentre for Learning Bangalore, we have been reading Bhagavan's Upadesham from the book Here in the Presence of Ramana, My Master, written by Mahakrishna Swami, and we are in the first chapter. After reading this week's Upadesham and meditating on it by Bhagavan's abundant grace, we will have a 20 minutes practice of Atma Vichara. Following that, our President Sarada Akka would be talking about Atma Vichara, self-enquiry, as it has been contemplated in Ramana Gita. Ramana Gita is again a compilation of all the questions put to Bhagavan and Bhagavan's answers in the form of Sanskrit verses by Ganapati Muni. And finally, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. Mahakrishna Swami goes on to say in the chapter Ramana, My Master, the constant affirmation that we are the self and the plenitude of the teachings of all the great masters allow us no chance to error. To be with the sage Bhagavan Sri Ramana is to be in the self. I repeat that. To be with the sage Bhagavan Sri Ramana is to be in the self. Starting from here, Sri A. R. Natarajanji has highlighted the entire thing that he has mentioned in italics. So I read that again. To be with the sage Bhagavan Sri Ramana is to be in the self. With his guidance, we can perceive that which we are. This is the great force of the direct path that this great avatar brought us. He showed us everything that we are and that we are not. In no other path can one note such clarity and coherence of what one is and what one is not. The direct path taught by Sri Ramana is supreme. He came to end this cycle and start another. For anyone who wants to liberate himself from all ignorance of non-being and become conscious of the absolute self, this is a complete path. There is none other more direct, more simple. This is how Bhagavan Sri Ramana indicates opening his door so that men can return to the natural state of being. So very beautiful, profound, very clear of what Bhagavan's direct path of self-enquiry does. The direct path, which Mahakrishna Swami puts it here, is removes one from all ignorance of non-being and become conscious of the absolute self. This is a complete path. There is none other more direct and more simple. So this is what he says. Now it becomes important for us to contemplate what is it that we are, what is it being called as non-being, and what is it being called as the absolute self. That is what we need to meditate on, which is what the Atma Vichara does. Every time we identify ourselves with the non-being, the Vichara asks us, to whom is this? Who am I? And moves our attention from the non-being to the absolute self. Therefore, this is the most direct and most simple. Now, to understand this a little bit more clearly, we can look at what happens when we identify with the non-being and why, therefore, understand the significance of identifying with the absolute self. Unless we clearly understand what ends up happening with us by identifying with the non-being, we will never understand the significance of identifying with the absolute self. So in the Vedantic way, it is explained very beautifully, which I felt I should share. Yesterday I was listening to Swami Sarvapriyananda. It's a very beautiful way in the Vedantic thing that they explain about the identifying with the non-being. Let us take the non-being here to be a small wave or a wave in the ocean. The moment the wave gets formed, okay, it has a name called wave, and it has a form, and it has a purpose to travel or something. The moment it gets formed, along with it, that identification that it is a wave, then it gets all this opportunity of comparing itself with the other waves which may be besides it. It may find a very big wave and feel very low because it is not as big as the other wave, may feel jealous. It may find itself to be, or if it finds a small wave or a bubble next to it, it may feel very proud of being bigger than that. So essentially, if we take that example and take it to ourselves, the moment we identify ourselves with the non-self, so what is the non-self? It is like the water which has been made into a wave. Like that, the self, the absolute self, which is pure being consciousness, limited to the body. So it is, we can draw this as two parallels. So the moment the water is makes or identifies with the wave as its name and form, then it has all these comparisons, it has all this issue that it has to deal with. And And it is the same with us. Moment we identify with the form, the name and form of this body, we may find ourselves to be equipped with few things and not equipped with few things. We may be intelligent, but may not be street smart. We may be, handsome looking, and or we may be looking very dark and ugly, which is what the world would not like to see, and things like that. So we could end up having many comparison of ourselves with other names and forms around us. And therefore, the identification with the name and form brings this whole world of possibility of comparison and feeling good, bad, miserable, and all of that with it. So, therefore, we have to understand identifying with the non-self, which we jolly well understand. We go with this every day. Whenever a thoughts come, we identify with it. We forget we are the self. We are the pure being, the pure consciousness. We enjoy as though it is my thought. But with all of these thoughts, there is always this possibility that we can end up comparing, and after a while we may feel, why did I waste so much of time with these thoughts? Or what ugly thoughts I had? And things like that we may end up finding ourselves to be. That is the penalty that we pay with identifying with the name and form. Further, what may happen? Why is it called a non-being? Because whatever we may do with this name and form, everything is only temporary. If we are feeling weak because something is not in our stomach, we may eat something to find ourselves refreshed. But we know very well that it is not a permanent solution. We may do many things with this name and form, which may make us improve the situation that we are in present. But we very well know everything is short-lived. Everything has a limited time, and it is going to return back to that old thing. So everything gets dissipated. So the another thing with the name and form is that we don't have a permanent solution. We are only constantly trying to improvise. So when we know this, then also we may inquire how much time and energy I want to keep on investing with this. Like how Sadhu Om Swami says, if all of my time is gone only in paying the rent of the place where I want to do business, and I don't make any profit at all, am I a good businessman? So he essentially says, if whole of my time goes away in really taking care of this body, and it again and again needs replenishment, am I a good person? Am I a good businessman? Is a very beautiful inquiry that we need to do. The third thing, identifying with the name and the form, is also like the wave. Swamiji very beautifully says that the wave keeps coming forward, and finally it sees something which is not an ocean, like a land somewhere far, and it asks the next wave, what is that we are seeing? I don't see the ocean anymore. There is something else apart. Oh, the other ocean, the other wave says, oh, that is where we go to die. We just go hit that, crash land on that land, a rock or something, and then we are no more. So therefore, another thing we find identifying with the names and form is that we are going to be non-being. Not only that whatever we are doing is temporary and it will again fade in time, but there will be a time where this will completely get dismantled. So it's like it is gone. So until a Vedantic wave comes, or until we recognize that what we were calling as wave is nothing but water, through and through water. Water alone is the wave. So the water took a name, took a form, and even when it took a name, took a form, it was water only. Every part of it was water only. Like that, this name and this form that we have taken is nothing but the self alone. It can't be anything. We cannot, if you remove consciousness out of this body, this eyes cannot see, this nose cannot smell, this whole drama or whatever the story that is happening will come to a standstill. So it is always the consciousness itself which has manifested into all of this. And we very well know when Bhagavan gives the example of the dream. And in the dream, all the names and forms that we envision to be, was all consciousness only at that time, and it all looked very real, all looked very real, like objective, but really it was only the consciousness. Therefore, what we recognize by Bhagavan's self-enquiry is that here and now we have the opportunity to identify ourselves as that water or as that self, or get carried away by these imaginary names and forms which are all for some certain purpose, which are all there, which are all gets created at point in time and then going to get destroyed. But it is all only something which is nothing but the self alone. But we forget that it is self. We take it to be some very important object. That is the thing of this objectifying. Moment we identify with the object, we forget the source. We forget, moment we identify with the wave, we forget that we are the water. Likewise, moment we identify ourselves with this name and form, we forget we are the pure consciousness, we are the existence. We identify with this name and this form, and therefore we see that this name is going to go away, this form is going to go away, and therefore I need to do something about it. So that is what is Mahakrishna Swami bringing our attention to. What does Bhagavan and all the great sages help? They give no chance to error, he says. He says that being with Bhagavan is being with the self. His guidance, we can perceive that which we are. Here and now, there is nothing that we need to do because we are the self alone. And self alone is being experienced at all times. However, initially we were all asked to inquire, who am I? So that there becomes a very clear picture in ourself, a clear experience in ourself, that we can stay as water. We need not be as a wave. It is not necessary that the water has to be a wave for its existence. Likewise, by inquiring, who am I, and letting go all these objects that we wrongly identify with, all the forms that we wrongly identify with, which may be the body, which may be the thoughts, we are made to inquire so that we recognize that we are that ever pure being consciousness which can stand absolutely independent. It need not identify itself with any form, with anything. Therefore, from that vantage point, we can understand that all names and forms are only nothing but that pure being consciousness. Likewise, Bhagavan here is saying, with this guidance, we can perceive that which we are, that independent truth that we are here and now, which alone is in all the names and forms. Like all the pot is nothing but the clay alone. If we We cannot envision a pot without the clay, but the clay can be without having the form of the pot. Or even the pot form is destroyed, it will continue to survive as the clay. Like that, when these names and forms goes away, we continue to be in the pure state of absolute self, which is what Bhagavan makes us recognize is. Then he says, this is the great force of direct path that this great avatar brought us. He showed us everything that we are and that we are not. So that we are is always the water, always the pure being consciousness. That which we are not is our identification with the objects, our limiting ourselves with the object and then forgetting who we really are. So he makes it very clearly. And therefore, the enquiry, to whom is this thought? Who am I? Here and now is the greatest direct path to move our attention or move our identification with the non-self to the identification with this self. So whether we do it with effort or we recognize it and stay with it, either which way, the goal has been reached, says Bhagavan here. So we'll meditate on this a little bit in the next week if possible. Therefore, Mahakrishna Swami has beautifully said that the direct path given to us by Bhagavan is the here and now, a way to stop identifying with the non-self, with the non-being, and here and now identify with the being, with the self that we verily are. So it is important that Atma Vichara makes us do this, recognize that Vichara makes us do it. And once this recognition, this realization happens, that we need not even inquire, we only need to understand that here and now we are the being alone, and the non-being is only a limitation that we are forcing on the ever-being truth, and that is only an imaginary thing. So with Bhagavan's immense grace, for the next 20 minutes, let us practice Atma Vichara. Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Morna Naka.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as a self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, we in this part of the satsang are meditating on the verses of Ramana Gita as support for self-enquiry and to clarify our understanding of self-enquiry further. The Ramana Gita are a set of answers by Bhagavan compiled by Ganapati Muni, and the questionnaires are varied. They are mostly the disciples of Ganapati Muni, and he himself has asked several questions of Bhagavan. We find that in one chapter alone, which is actually the 6th and 7th chapters, there is no questioner. Bhagavan has spoken on his own, and the 6th chapter is Hridaya Vidya. That's where he has spoken on his own. That apart, there are questioners, and the chapters have been classified into 18 chapters based on different subjects, different areas of spiritual sadhana. Now we are now meditating on the 13th chapter, which is the only chapter where the questioner is a woman. And in this case, the woman devotee is the wife of Ganapati Muni. In the previous satsang, we meditated upon how Bhagavan had addressed her as Amma and how she had total faith in Bhagavan. And she is asked a couple of questions, 2 questions in fact. One question, that first question which she was asked is that if a woman devotee or a woman sadhaka finds hurdles in her daily life to the practice of Atma Sadhana, is it okay if she takes sannyasa? The chapter heading, therefore, the Muni gives the chapter heading as Sannyaso Stri Purushayoho Tulyadhikara Nirupanam. Is a woman equal to a man in taking sannyasa, in her right, in her adhikara to take sannyasa? Does she have equal rights to renounce? That is a question which she has asked. And this is, one must remember, this is in way back in 1917, when women's freedom or women's emancipation movements had not really taken flight the way they have in the 20th and the 21st century. So women were still closeted, as against the Vedic tradition, where we find Gargi, Maitreyi and all, who are equal to Yajnavalkya. They ask him about Atma Sadhana and they tell him, we would like to be your partner. Maitreyi says, I would be your partner in this search. If you are renouncing home, I will come with you. Why do you leave me behind? That is what Maitreyi asks Yajnavalkya, the great sage. She says, why do you want to renounce and go away? He says, I want to renounce because I have to pursue self-knowledge to the exclusion of all else. Then she says, if that is something so great, should I also not pursue the same? Then he says, most welcome. And he answers her questions, he gives her a detailed description of the path, and we have the famous statement by Yajnavalkya in their conversation, Atmanastu kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati. Everything is dear because of the self, O Maitreyi. Your child is not dear to you because he is your child. Your husband is not dear to you because he is your husband. Neither are you dear to me because you are my wife. No thing in this world is dear on account of itself. Atmanastu kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati. Now, it is because of desire for the self that everything is dear. This is because the self pervades in everything, because it is the self which is attractive. It is not the object which is attractive. And there were such great people. And in Yoga Vashishta, as also in Tripura Rahasya, we hear of the great woman Jivan Mukta, Chudala in Yoga Vashishta, in the story in Yoga Vashishta. Chudala is the queen who is the Jivan Mukta queen. And she is the one who guides her husband on the path of liberation. Similarly, in Tripura Rahasya, Hema Lekha, the queen, is the realized one, and she guides her husband Hema Chuda on the path of self-knowledge. So, we do have in earlier days that history of women being equal to men. And Ganapati Muni in his outlook is very much for women's impact. He believes in women's emancipation, and he has supported the women's power, the importance of women's freedom, the role of women in the upbringing of children, in the family, and in the rejuvenation of our country as well. So he has given a very beautiful introduction to Vishalakshi, whereby saying, almost indicating that women have every right to follow this path and, of course, to pose the question to Bhagavan. And Bhagavan says, surely there is no difference in Atma Jnana. Bhagavan's answer is always directed towards Atma Jnana. Bhagavan does not talk about various other aspects. Even sannyasa, even when he is talking about sannyasa, he will say the Shastras do not prohibit sannyasa, but abiding in the self and becoming an ascetic is fine. So the emphasis is always abiding in the self. Why do you want to become a sannyasi is implied over there. What is the need for sannyasa? You are saying there are hurdles, but you can abide in the self. The self is ever available. That seems to be Bhagavan's indication. But Bhagavan has already told, and we hear of Devaraja Mudaliar's question to Bhagavan, where he says, is everything destined? And Bhagavan says, everything is destined. To Mother Aragamma, he says, everything is destined. Which means one is not to pay any attention to the trajectory, the physical trajectory of one's life, where one is placed in space and time, and how the circumstances are evolving based on where one is placed are immaterial according to Bhagavan. They should not be paid attention to because they cannot be controlled, they cannot be changed. Don't be thinking about that. But if it is so, the Shastras do not prohibit the taking of sannyasa, which in another way, the implication is that there is no prohibition for a person wanting to dedicate himself or herself completely to Atma Sadhana. In fact, if you look at the Ashrama Vichara earlier chapter, where there is a demarcation, first there is Brahmacharya, then there is Grahastha, then there is Vanaprastha, then there is Sannyasa. Normally, one has to take sannyasa only after going through the first three stages. But though that question is not being posed to Bhagavan over here, the implication is that even if a brahmachari wants to renounce, the brahmachari is free to renounce, as is the grahastha, as is the finally the vanaprastha. So, but there itself Bhagavan has indicated also sannyaso nirmalam jnanam na kashayo na mundanam. Sannyasa is not the donning of ochre robes, it is not the shaving of the head, it is not the tonsure. Bhagavan has said. So now when the question is being posed, can a woman take sannyasa? Automatically Bhagavan is saying abiding in the self is open, it is open to everyone. And where in Bhagavan's ashrama, Kau Lakshmi is there, Valli the deer is there, then there is Jackie the dog also. Even among the animals, there are the men and there are the women, and there are all the women devotees and there are the men devotees, and Mother Aragamma has been given liberation by Bhagavan. So Bhagavan is clearly saying there are no differences for abiding the self. This means to say that if any thought of any hurdle comes in our mind, saying on account of this I may not be able to abide in the self, or on account of that I may not be able to abide in the self, the answer lies in getting back to the self which is ever available through self-enquiry. The second question which Vishalakshi put to Bhagavan is Jivantya eva muktaya dehapato bhavedyadi dahanam va samadhirva karyam yuktamanantaram. If a woman who is a Jivan Mukta should drop her body, is it right to cremate the body or should a Samadhi be erected? This is the question posed. And Bhagavan says, after listening to both the Prashna Dvayamidam Shrutva Bhagavan Rishi Sattamaha Avochan Nirnayam Tatra Sarva Shastrartha Tattvavit, says Muni. That is what he is calling Bhagavan here. He says he gave decisive answers. He who is the knower of all Shastra. So what Muni is saying is once Bhagavan has given an answer, he is the knower of all Shastras and it is a decisive answer. There will be no further room for asking any doubts in that particular area. Because this Muni indicates even in the earlier chapter, he says, after getting one answer for Bhagavan, I asked him about a doubt in another area. You cannot have a doubt in one area in which Bhagavan has already given the answer. So Muni is pointing out the necessity for this total faith in Bhagavan. And historically, this faith that the Muni has in Bhagavan's words is of import, especially with reference to this chapter. Because then what does Bhagavan answer about this? Muktatvasya vishishtatvat bodhasya cha vadhurapi jivan muktana dahya syat taddeho hi suralayaha. The body of a jivan mukta woman should not be cremated because that body is a temple of God. So this is also an indication for us of the enormity, the magnitude, the magnificence of Jivan Mukti, which is where self-enquiry takes us. That the divinity is there in every one of us. But what happens in Jivan Mukti? That connect with the divinity happens. So the divinity becomes manifest. That which is dormant becomes manifest. It becomes evident. So Bhagavan says, not only does he say that the body should not be cremated, he further says, ये दोषा देहदहने पुंसो मुक्तस्य संस्मृताः मुक्ताय सन्ति ते सर्वे देहदाहे च योषितः. If the body of a Jivan Mukta woman is cremated, the same negative forces that come into play when the body of a male Jivan Mukta is cremated will come into play. So, in this context, when mother attained liberation and Bhagavan simply declared, mother has been absorbed. Somebody said she has passed away. He said, no, she has been absorbed. So the question arose as to what to do with the body. Bhagavan only describes mother's body was shining like a yogini in meditation. Bhagavan says there is no pollution. Normally after death we will say pollution, food should not be had. Everyone who is not yet eaten can have their dinner. And he also had his dinner at that point of time. Mother's liberation happened on 19 May 1922, 5 years after this question was asked. But Ganapati Muni remembered this answer given to Vishalakshi, and he guided the happenings of the events that were to follow by saying Bhagavan has already given his decisive answer that the body of a Jivan Mukta woman should not be cremated, and Bhagavan has now declared that Mother Aragamma has been absorbed. So, a samadhi should be made for Mother Aragamma. It is a tradition that samadhis are not made on the hill because it is Shiva's Swarupa, and even Virupaksha cave, there is Virupaksha's final force is there. But what did he do? He became Vibhuti Swarupa because samadhi should not be made on the hill. He became sacred ash, and that sacred ash has been molded into a linga by Bhagavan. So one does not have samadhis on the hill. So they found a suitable place for Mother Aragamma's samadhi, and it is meaningful for us maybe once in the following satsang to dwell on that great episode of Mother's Mukti. But here itself, Bhagavan has indicated one of the namas in the Ashtotra is Dirghadarshine Namaha, the all-knowing one, the far-sighted one. So Bhagavan, when he says everything is already planned by the divine force, here this question has come. Why? Because the divine force has already planned. And earlier, in 1914, Mother had come to Bhagavan. She was almost dead with typhoid, and Bhagavan composed a prayer to Arunachala. And in that prayer, he asks a question, Shahati Mutu Vaden Shatru. You should make her one with you. After that, where is the need for the fire of cremation? So he has already prayed. But that is his personal prayer. And then the second episode is Vishalakshi asking. Why should Vishalakshi ask? Okay, she asks whether women can take sannyasa. That's a different story because maybe she wants to take, or she sees some women who are eager to take sannyasa and she wants Bhagavan's blessings for such women who would want to take sannyasa. Today, we have many orders of women sannyasi as well. Bhagavan has then itself, he has blessed the renunciation by women. Whether it is the wearing, again, whether it's the wearing of ochre robes or not wearing ochre robes. But the blessing, this chapter is a great blessing for those who happen to be, by the play of destiny, in a body which is of the female gender. So that is a blessing by Bhagavan. And also he is pointing out, he is showing how the divine play happens. And when we see that it is so beautiful, the divine play, and when we understand that the divine play is happening all the time, everywhere, in every one of our lives, then self-enquiry would become so simple for us, because we need not worry or we need not think about any event whatsoever. The supreme force is taking care. So that conviction is where this chapter is leading us, and it is also about the glory of Jivan Mukta, of Jivan Mukti itself. Because he says that in Tirumular, where there is detailed description of how a Jivan Mukta's body should be put into the Samadhi pit, how the Samadhi pit should be made, and that was the method followed for Mother Aragamma's Samadhi, and then for Kau Lakshmi's Samadhi, and finally for Bhagavan's Samadhi in the ashram, and of course the great ones, the devotee sages whose Samadhis we see behind Ramanashramam. But Tirumular, in that text, where we find him describing how to make the Samadhi, has dedicated larger number of verses to the problems that will occur in society, in that kingdom. Those days it was monarchy, right? The whole kingdom will suffer if the body of Jivan Mukta is not properly interred and given the due respect. And this also shows us the power which is available in Mother Aragamma's Samadhi, in Bhagavan's Samadhi, for all of us, and for those of us who are able to go there physically and to invoke their presences from wherever we are. This is a mysterious force. So in the previous Shakti Vichara, Bhagavan has already said we cannot explain. We can only up to a point explain the ways in which the power works and the power manifests and the power reveals. But this much is true, that the power is there and it's working. So we are in the safest hands, could not be in safer hands than in the loving hands of that magnificent power and gracious and loving power. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri
Namo Ramana Khan, thank you. Apara Satchit Sukavaridashe Yasyormimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chintavihinam Hrudi Chintayami Chintavihinam Hrudi Chintayami